Imagine that the most beautiful woman in the courtroom is the very same person accused of the most horrifying murder. Today, our story is about Barbara Graham, the woman the press called the Bloody Babs, and also the Angelic Killer. She had an innocent face and a calm smile, but behind that smile was a secret. And if you find out what it was, it may change the way you see human beings forever. Before we begin, I want you to focus with me on this question. Can a difficult childhood turn an innocent person into a criminal who loves bloodshed, or was evil planted inside her from the very beginning? Stay with me until the end, because in the final moments of this story, everything turns upside down. Without taking too long, let's begin. Our story starts on June 26, 1923, specifically in Oakland, California, the day Barbara was born. And here came the first shock. Barbara was not born in a hospital like most children. Barbara was born inside a prison. Her mother was a minor, only 17 years old, and she was in jail for prostitution. The very first time Barbara opened her eyes to the world, she saw prison walls. And here I want to ask you, the one watching this story, can a child born under these conditions grow into a normal human being, or was that nearly impossible from the start? What matters is this: Barbara's childhood was filled with chaos. When she was 2 years old, her mother, Hortense, was sent to a girls' reformatory school, and Barbara was placed in foster care. All that time, Barbara kept waiting for the day her mother would leave the institution, come for her, and take her home. But sadly, dear viewer, that day never came. When her mother was released, she refused to take Barbara back. Relatives went to her and told her, "Take your daughter from foster care and raise her." But she refused strongly, and she answered them with a sentence that should never come from a mother who understands motherhood. Barbara's mother said, word for word, "I couldn't even take care of myself, and you want me to take care of my daughter?" She refused in every way possible to go and bring Barbara home from foster care. That was the first real stab in Barbara's heart, delivered by the person who should have loved her the most. And the question here is simple: if your own mother is the first person to throw you away, how do you think you will feel toward the whole world after that? After her mother rejected her, Barbara moved from place to place, sometimes with relatives, sometimes with neighbors. She had no stable home. That made her feel completely alone, as if nobody wanted her. Of course, with such a difficult life, she could not get a proper education. Her schooling was poor, and that affected her life in a huge way. By the time she reached adolescence, the street had become her real home. She stayed out late, wandered around, and looked for anything that could make her forget the past. Literally, most of her time was spent in the streets. Until one day, she was arrested for vagrancy and placed in a reform institution. But Barbara was not the type to surrender easily. She escaped from the institution for a few days, but the police caught her again, and this time she was sentenced to serve in the Ventura School for Girls, the same reformatory school her mother had once entered before her. History was repeating itself. Your fate is your mother's fate, whether you accept it or not. Was history forcing Barbara to spin in the same cycle her mother once lived in? Or had she already started choosing that path for herself? In 1939, when she was released from the reformatory, all her old relationships were gone. Everyone she had known had cut ties with her. At that moment, she decided she had to change her life for the better. She enrolled in college to study business administration, and she got married at the age of 16 to a man named Harry Keeble. She had their first child while she was still studying. But that marriage did not last. She separated from her husband in 1941. After that, she married again and had a second child. But this time too, there was no stability at all. Barbara was sinking into a world of nightlife and drugs, and that destroyed her relationship with her husband. The marriage ended in divorce. The home fell apart. The marriage collapsed. And her mind began to slip little by little. Was Barbara trying to escape her past, or was she creating for herself an even worse present? Focus carefully on that question, because the answer will appear in the events ahead. Barbara's life began to change for the worse in a way far darker than before. She started using drugs, gambling, and surrounding herself with criminals whose reputations were already in the gutter. And with all that chaos and destruction, it is no surprise that prison came back into her life. In 1944, she went to prison again, this time on a prostitution charge. And when she got out, she returned to the same old habits. she went back to spending time with swindlers, criminals, thieves, and even hired killers. Because of another reckless choice, she returned to prison yet again. But this time, she was sentenced to 5 years because she committed perjury in court in order to protect 2 criminals. Prison had quite literally become her second home. Barbara served her sentence in the California state prison system. Every time she got out, she would say, "This time I will change. This time I will become better." When Barbara was released, she worked as a nurse in Nevada. There, she married for the 3rd time in 1951. But that marriage also did not last. There was no understanding between her and her 3rd husband, and they separated. After that, Barbara left nursing and started working in a nightclub. With time, she returned to prostitution. And this is where the real horror begins. In 1953, Barbara married a man named Henry Graham and gave birth to her 3rd child. Henry was a former criminal and a drug addict. After marrying Barbara, he introduced her to a circle of criminals where each one was worse than the next. Just imagine placing a woman like Barbara, someone who acted before she thought, in the middle of people who knew nothing except crime. What kind of ending would you expect? Now we are entering the most dangerous chapter of the story. Southwest, pay close attention. After joining Henry's criminal circle, Barbara met 2 men, Emmett Perkins and Jack Santo. Her relationship with Perkins became more than friendship. It turned into a romantic relationship, and that relationship was the spark that set everything on fire. Perkins had an attractive robbery plan. He, Jack Santo, and another man Barbara did not know well, named John True, suggested that Barbara join them in the operation. Barbara foolishly agreed right away. The target was an elderly woman named Mabel Monahan, who was 64 years old. She had a physical disability and lived in Burbank, California. The gang was convinced that this old woman's house was full of money and jewelry. But here comes the logical question: was this elderly woman really rich? The shocking answer is no. She was not wealthy at all. In fact, she was barely getting by, living on the pension of her deceased husband. So who misled this gang and made them believe she was rich? Or more accurately, where did the idea come from? The reason, dear viewer, was that this elderly woman's daughter had once been married to a wealthy gambler named Luther B. After the daughter separated from him and moved away, Luther did not cut off his relationship with the elderly woman. He kept visiting her frequently, and their bond remained unusually strong. That was how rumors began to spread that Luther had hidden his money and jewelry in Mabel Monahan's house. And as always, people love rumors. They love spreading them. Those rumors turned the old woman's house into a tempting target for every thief and every criminal gang, including Barbara and her group. On March 10, 1953, Barbara, Perkins, John True, and another man named Baxter Shorter decided to carry out the operation at night. When darkness fell, Barbara went to the old woman's house and knocked on the door. She told her, "My car broke down. Could you let me come in and use the telephone?" The poor old woman had a kind heart. When she heard a woman's voice at the door late at night, she opened it to help her. But when she opened the door fully, she saw 3 men standing behind Barbara. At that moment, the old woman became frightened and tried to shut the door. But the 3 men pushed it open, forced their way inside, tied her hands behind her back, and made her sit in the living room. Then they began asking her, "Where is the money? Where is the jewelry?" But the old woman ignored them. She refused to speak. She would not say a single word. And here the accounts began to differ. In court, it was said that Barbara lost her temper, grabbed a gun, and struck Mabel on the head several times until she began to bleed. Then Barbara allegedly said to Perkins, "You finish it. Keep hitting her until she confesses where she hid the jewelry and money." According to witness testimony, Perkins continued beating the old woman. And when they grew tired of her silence, Barbara pulled a pillow, placed it over the old woman's face, and pressed down hard until she died. All of this happened because they found nothing. Just imagine this: the place where they killed the old woman was right next to a closet, and inside that closet were pieces of jewelry worth $15,000. But they never noticed the closet, and they left the house without taking a single cent. The next day, March 11th, the gardener arrived to trim the plants. He found the old woman's house strangely unresponsive and immediately felt that something was wrong. So he called the police. The police came, entered the house, and found the old woman dead in the middle of the living room. Her hands were tied, and her face was covered in bruises. That was when they knew this was not just an ordinary robbery. Her purse still contained $447 and some jewelry. If these had been ordinary thieves, they would have taken everything. After Mabel Monahan's daughter heard what had happened to her mother, she offered a reward of $5,000 to anyone who gave information leading to the killers. And from there, the end began for Barbara's gang. After news of the reward spread, an informant led the police to one of the gang members, John True. When the police got to him, John became afraid and agreed to testify against his group in exchange for avoiding prosecution, or at least receiving a lighter sentence. And he did testify against them. Most of his testimony placed the blame on Barbara and made her carry the largest share of responsibility. That was when the investigation truly shifted. Barbara spent the entire time screaming that she was innocent. But her behavior in prison damaged her reputation even more. Barbara was the kind of person who always thought she had two options, one solution that might save her, and another that would drag her into disaster. And somehow, she almost always chose the option that led straight into disaster. While she was in jail, she tried to bribe a new inmate so that the woman would testify that Barbara had been with her at the time of the murder. But that inmate went straight to the police, informed them of the attempted bribery, and received leniency in return. The trap snapped shut on Barbara. This incident badly damaged Barbara's image in court. When they asked her in court, "Why did you do that?" she gave a shocking answer. She told the judge, "Have you ever felt despair? Do you know what it means to reach a point where you don't know what to do?" That was, quite literally, what she said when they asked her why she had done it. The entire trial began to revolve around Barbara. Even though there were 3 men with her facing the same charges, all the attention and all the media focused on Barbara. You might think that would help her. In reality, it did the exact opposite. The media was cheap. They only wanted to sell newspapers with sensational headlines and dramatic stories. They described her as a seductive woman who could control any man and make him do whatever she wanted. And once the media grabbed that image, they built a monster out of it. Barbara had worked as a waitress, and in that Western social environment it was not unusual for her clothes to be eye-catching. But the press exaggerated it and turned it into something much larger. One newspaper even wrote that in court she yawned and stared at her polished nails while testimony described how Mabel had been killed. In one of the hearings, when she was called to testify, she stumbled and fell to the floor. The newspapers immediately claimed she was acting in order to delay the sentence. In the end, the court sentenced Barbara and the men with her to death for robbery and murder. John True, however, escaped. Barbara tried to appeal and reduce the sentence, but every door closed in her face. She was transferred to death row in San Quentin prison. While in prison, she gave an interview to a newspaper that called her the Bloody Woman. In that interview, Barbara spoke about her mother and said that her mother did not care whether she lived or died, as long as Barbara did not bother her. Barbara also said, "If I have to spend the rest of my life in prison, then I am willing to do that. And maybe that would be better for my children than for me to die." On June 3, 1955, Barbara was supposed to be executed at 10 o'clock in the morning. But the governor of California at the time, Goodwin J. Knight, delayed the execution until 10:45 a.m. When the clock reached 10:45, the execution was delayed again until 11 o'clock. At that point, Barbara became furious and said, "Why are you torturing me? I was ready to go at 10 o'clock. Every few minutes you keep changing the time." At 11:28, Barbara was taken from her cell and brought into the gas chamber. She asked them to cover her eyes. The execution officer, Joe Ferretti, told her, "Take a deep breath. This won't bother you." She answered him with a final sentence, "How do you know this won't bother me?" 3 minutes later, she was executed, along with the 2 men who had been sentenced beside her. She became the 3rd woman to be executed by gas in the history of the state of California. As for John True, after testifying against them, he walked away from it all. But Barbara's story did not end with her execution. After her death, films and theatrical works were produced about her, the most famous of them being I Want to Live, released in 1958. Actress Susan Hayward played Barbara and won an Academy Award. But the strange thing is that the film portrayed Barbara almost as if she were an innocent victim who had been wronged by the courts. So even after her death, people could not agree, was she a criminal, or was she a victim of circumstances, the system, and the media? And now the question is for you. Was Barbara a victim of her circumstances, or was she a criminal who chose the path of crime by herself? Leave your answer in the comments. I am sure people will disagree sharply in judging her. And most importantly, do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next stories. God willing, I will see you next week in a new story. Goodbye.